The late spring heat in Oxnard was almost unbearable as I arranged the CPR dummies in the community center's main hall. Being an EMT instructor meant dealing with all sorts of weather conditions, but teaching first aid basics during a heat wave was pushing my limits. I wiped the sweat from my forehead, my blonde hair sticking to my neck despite being tied back in a neat ponytail. "Miss Williams?" a voice called from behind me. "I'm here for the demonstration." I turned around and found myself staring into the most striking green eyes I'd ever seen. The woman wheeled herself closer, her athletic build evident even from her seated position. Her brunette hair fell in gentle waves around her shoulders, and her smile lit up her entire face. "Please, call me Christina," I managed to say, trying not to stare. "You must be Daphne Roberts, the basketball player who volunteered to help with demonstrations?" She nodded, wheeling herself next to one of the practice mats. "That's me. Though I warn you, I'm a terrible patient, always asking too many questions." Her playful tone made me smile despite my professional demeanor. The class filled up quickly with community members eager to learn basic life-saving techniques. I couldn't help but notice how Daphne's presence commanded attention, not because of her wheelchair, but because of her natural charisma. During the pulse-checking demonstration, I guided her hand to my wrist. "Feel that? That's what a normal rhythm feels like." The moment our skin touched, something shifted in the air between us. Her fingers were cool against my wrist, and I found myself holding the position longer than necessary. "Your pulse is a bit fast," she remarked with a slight smirk. I blamed it on the heat, but we both knew better. The CPR demonstration proved even more challenging. As I explained proper hand placement, Daphne volunteered to demonstrate on me. Her touch was gentle but firm as she positioned her hands over my sternum. The whole room disappeared for a moment, and I had to remind myself to breathe. "Remember," I said to the class, my voice slightly shakier than usual, "in a real emergency, you need to check for responsiveness first." I demonstrated on Daphne, my hand brushing against her shoulder. The electricity between us was undeniable. The rest of the session passed in a blur of instruction and demonstrations. Daphne proved to be an excellent assistant, adding helpful insights from her perspective as a Paralympic athlete. Her presence made the usually routine class feel alive with possibility. As people filed out after the session, Daphne lingered behind, helping me gather the equipment. "You're really good at this," she said, passing me a training manual. "The way you handle the class, it's impressive." "Thanks," I replied, trying to maintain my professional composure. "You were pretty impressive yourself. Not everyone can make pulse checking seem interesting." She laughed, a sound that seemed to echo through the empty room. "Well, maybe we could practice more sometime? Over coffee, perhaps?" The invitation hung in the air between us, loaded with potential. I found myself nodding before I could overthink it. "I'd like that. For professional development, of course." "Of course," she echoed. But her knowing smile suggested she saw right through my attempt at maintaining professional distance. As she wheeled toward the door, she glanced back over her shoulder. "Same time next week for the next class?" "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, watching her leave and already looking forward to our next encounter. The heat of the day had nothing on the warmth spreading through my chest as I packed up the last of the equipment, wondering what I'd just gotten myself into. That night, as I lay in bed reviewing the day's events, I couldn't shake the memory of her touch during the demonstrations. Something had shifted in my carefully ordered world, and I wasn't sure if I was ready for what that meant. But one thing was certain, next week's class couldn't come soon enough. That promised coffee turned into something I hadn't expected. We met at a quiet corner cafe, away from the bustle of downtown Oxnard. Daphne was already there when I arrived, sipping from a steaming mug and reading something on her phone. She wore a casual tank top that showed off her toned arms, a testament to her athletic lifestyle. "I hope you don't mind, I ordered you a latte," she said as I sat down. "I noticed that's what you were drinking during break at the training session." I was touched by her attention to detail. "You're observant." "Part of being an athlete," she replied with a slight shrug. "You learn to notice everything about your surroundings, your opponents, your own body. It becomes second nature." What started as a casual coffee chat evolved into hours of conversation. We talked about everything from our careers to our dreams. Daphne shared her journey to becoming a Paralympic athlete, the accidents and setbacks that led her to wheelchair basketball, and how she found strength in what others might see as limitations. Most people see the chair first, she said, gesturing to her wheelchair. They don't see the athlete, the competitor, the person. But on the court, none of that matters. It's just about skill, strategy, and heart. I found myself leaning forward, completely absorbed in her words. I'd love to see you play sometime, I said before I could stop myself. Her face lit up. Really? We have practice tomorrow evening. You should come. That's how I found myself in the gym the next day, watching from the sidelines as Daphne transformed into a different person entirely. Her movements were fluid and precise, her chair an extension of herself as she weaved through defenders and sank basket after basket. The intensity in her eyes, the fierce determination in every move, it was mesmerizing. During a water break, she rolled over to where I sat, slightly breathless but grinning. What do you think? I think you've been holding out on me, I admitted. You're amazing out there. She wiped her face with a towel, her cheeks flushed from exertion. Maybe you could help me with some stretches after practice? Your EMT knowledge could be useful. I agreed, trying to maintain professional composure while my heart raced at the prospect. After practice, as other players filtered out, I helped her with her cool-down routine. The gym was quiet except for our breathing and the occasional squeak of her chair. Your shoulder muscles are really tight, I observed, my hands working carefully on her upper back. You need to be careful not to strain them. That's why I need an expert like you around, she said softly, and I could hear the smile in her voice. Later that night, as I lay in bed checking my phone, a message popped up from Daphne. Thanks for coming today. It meant a lot. I typed back, thanks for showing me your world. What started as a simple text exchange became our nightly ritual. We'd share stories about our days, our hopes, our fears. Sometimes we'd talk about nothing at all, just sending silly memes or random thoughts. I found myself looking forward to these conversations more than I cared to admit. One night, after a particularly long text session, she sent, You know, I've never met anyone quite like you, Christina. I stared at those words for a long time, my heart doing strange flips in my chest. Finally, I replied, Same here. It was becoming increasingly clear that what had started as a professional relationship was evolving into something more. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from her, I felt that familiar warmth spread through my chest. But with it came a nervousness I hadn't felt in years. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I couldn't help but wonder where this was leading. The professional boundaries I'd always maintained so carefully were beginning to blur, and for the first time in my career, I wasn't sure if I wanted to maintain them at all. The last text I sent that night was simple. Sweet dreams, Daphne. Her response came quickly. Better dreams because of you. I fell asleep smiling, already looking forward to whatever tomorrow might bring, knowing that somehow, in just a few short days, my life had shifted in ways I never expected but couldn't regret. The weekend arrived with perfect weather for the local sports clinic, where Daphne had convinced me to volunteer. I arrived early, setting up the first aid station while watching her organize the wheelchair basketball demonstration area. She moved with such confidence, directing volunteers and arranging equipment with natural authority. Need any help with those bandages? Daphne wheeled over, grinning at my meticulously organized supplies. You're probably the only person I know who color codes their medical tape. Organization saves lives, I replied with mock seriousness, but couldn't help smiling. Besides, you're one to talk. I saw you measuring the exact distances between those cones. Throughout the morning, we worked in perfect sync. When a young athlete scraped his knee, Daphne calmed him down while I cleaned and bandaged the wound. During the basketball demonstrations, I stood ready with water and first aid supplies, admiring how she inspired the participants with her patient coaching and infectious enthusiasm. During lunch break, we found a quiet spot under a tree. You're really good with the kids, I said, watching her face light up at the compliment. They remind me of myself at that age, she replied, her voice softening. So determined to prove they can do anything despite what others might think. As the afternoon sessions wound down, Daphne surprised me with an invitation. Want to come over for dinner? I make a mean pasta primavera. My heart skipped a beat. You cook too? Is there anything you can't do? Well, I'm terrible at karaoke, she laughed. But I promise the pasta will make up for it. That evening, I found myself in her cozy apartment, perched on a bar stool watching her navigate her adapted kitchen with practiced ease. The smell of garlic and herbs filled the air as she chopped vegetables with impressive speed. "Wine?" she offered, reaching for a bottle. As I took the glass from her, our fingers brushed, sending that now familiar spark through my body. We talked through dinner, sharing stories about our past relationships and the challenges we'd faced. Daphne spoke about her last girlfriend, who couldn't handle the demands of her athletic career. I told her about my own failed relationships, how my dedication to my work had often created distance. "It's hard finding someone who understands," she said softly, pushing her empty plate aside. "Someone who sees past the surface." "I see you," I replied, barely above a whisper. The air between us crackled with tension. She moved closer, her green eyes holding mine. Time seemed to slow as she reached up, her fingers gentle against my cheek. When our lips finally met, it felt like coming home. The kiss was soft, tentative at first, then deeper as we both leaned into it. My hands found their way to her shoulders, and I could feel her heart racing beneath my palms. When we finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, she rested her forehead against mine. "I've been wanting to do that since that first day at the community center," she admitted. "Me too," I confessed, running my fingers through her soft hair. "I just wasn't sure if you felt the same way." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and stolen kisses. We talked about our fears, our hopes, the complications that might arise from our growing relationship, but somehow none of those concerns seemed insurmountable when we were together. As I prepared to leave, Daphne caught my hand. "Stay," she whispered. "Just to sleep. I'm not ready for this evening to end." I hesitated only for a moment before nodding. That night, falling asleep with Daphne in my arms, listening to her steady breathing, I realized something had fundamentally shifted in my world. The careful boundaries I'd maintained, the professional distance I'd always kept, none of it seemed to matter anymore. In the morning, waking up to see her peaceful face in the early light, I knew there was no going back. Whatever challenges lay ahead, whatever obstacles we might face, this feeling was worth fighting for. As we shared coffee and shy smiles over breakfast, I couldn't help but think about how a simple first aid class had led to this moment. Sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places, and sometimes taking a risk means opening yourself up to something beautiful. Before leaving for work, I kissed her goodbye, already looking forward to seeing her again. "Dinner at my place tonight?" I asked. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," she replied, her smile brightening my entire day. The weeks leading up to Daphne's championship became increasingly intense. As her training schedule doubled, I found myself spending more time at the sports complex, splitting my attention between my EMT duties and watching her practice. The determination in her eyes during those sessions was something else entirely, a fierce focus that made my heart race every time I caught her gaze. "Your form is improving," I noted one evening, helping her stretch after a particularly grueling practice session. My hands moved professionally across her shoulders, but there was an underlying tension in every touch. "But you're pushing yourself too hard." "The championship is in 3 weeks," she replied, leaning into my touch. "I need to be ready." Her skin was warm beneath my fingers, and I could feel the powerful muscles developed from years of athletic training. The physical therapy sessions had become our special time, a blend of professional care and intimate moments. I'd learned every curve of her shoulders, every tension point that needed attention. Sometimes, while working on a particularly tight muscle, I'd hear her breath catch, and our eyes would meet in the mirror, filled with unspoken desire. One evening, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the gym windows, Daphne caught my hand as I finished her therapy session. "You know," she said softly, "I've never had anyone care for me the way you do." The gym was empty except for us, the silence heavy with possibility. My hands stilled on her shoulders, and she reached up to cover them with her own. The moment stretched between us, electric with tension, until I leaned down and pressed my lips to the curve of her neck. What followed was a blur of sensation and emotion, hands exploring with growing confidence, kisses becoming more urgent. We found our way to the private therapy room, where professional boundaries dissolved into something far more personal. Later, as we caught our breath, Daphne traced patterns on my arm. "I think that was the most effective therapy session yet," she teased, making me laugh despite my flushed cheeks. But as our relationship deepened, so did my concerns. I found myself watching her more carefully during practices, noticing every wince, every sign of fatigue. The pressure she was putting on herself was intense, and I could see it taking its toll. "I'm falling for you," I admitted one night as we lay tangled together in my bed, "and it terrifies me because I can't be objective anymore. When I see you pushing yourself so hard." "Hey," she interrupted, pulling me closer. "That's exactly why I need you. You see me, all of me. Not just the athlete, not just the woman in the wheelchair. You see everything." But the weight of my feelings was becoming overwhelming. During practices, I found myself holding my breath every time she made a risky move. My professional instincts warred with my personal feelings, creating a constant tension I wasn't sure how to resolve. The breaking point came during a practice game when Daphne took a hard hit that sent her chair spinning. I was on my feet before I could think, my heart in my throat. She was fine, laughing it off with her teammates, but I had to excuse myself to the bathroom to calm down. Looking at myself in the mirror, I realized just how deep I was in. This wasn't just attraction or affection anymore. This was something that could shake my whole world, something that made my chest ache with equal parts joy and fear. When I returned to the gym, Daphne was waiting, concern evident in her eyes. "You okay?" "No," I admitted. "I'm terrified. Terrified of how much I care about you, of how much it would hurt if anything happened to you." She wheeled closer, taking my hands in hers. "That's what love feels like, Christina. It's scary as hell, but it's worth it." Love. The word hung between us, neither confirming nor denying it, but we both knew that's exactly what this was becoming. As I drove home that night, I realized I'd crossed a line I couldn't uncross. My professional distance was completely gone, replaced by something far more powerful and far more frightening. But before I could fully process these realizations, everything was about to change. None of us could have predicted what was coming next, how our lives would be turned upside down by a single phone call. The call came at 3 a.m., jolting me awake from a deep sleep. The number was unfamiliar, and something about its appearance on my phone screen sent a chill down my spine. "Hello?" My voice was thick with sleep. "Are you Christina Williams?" The voice was distorted, whether intentionally or through poor connection, I couldn't tell. "The EMT who works with the Paralympic team?" I sat up straighter, suddenly alert. "Yes, who is this?" "Listen carefully. Sarah Martinez isn't just missing practice because of a family emergency." The name caught my attention immediately. Sarah was one of Daphne's teammates, who had mysteriously stopped showing up for training 3 days ago. "You need to start asking questions before someone else disappears." "What are you talking about? Who is this?" But the line was already dead. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, the mysterious call playing on repeat in my mind. When I arrived at the community center the next morning, something felt off. The usual warmth of the place was replaced by an underlying tension I couldn't quite place. "Christina." Janet, the center's administrator, caught my arm as I walked in. "Have you seen the notice board?" My heart dropped when I saw it. Pinned among the usual announcements and schedules was a newspaper clipping about match fixing in Paralympic sports, with Sarah's team photo circled in red marker. Beneath it, someone had scrawled, "Who's next?" I quickly took a photo before removing it, my hands shaking slightly. This had to be connected to the phone call. During that morning's first aid class, I could barely focus. My mind kept wandering to Sarah, to the strange call, to the threatening message. When Daphne wheeled in for our usual lunch meeting, I pulled her aside. "Have you heard anything from Sarah?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Daphne's expression darkened. "No, and it's not like her. The family emergency story doesn't add up. Her sister called looking for her yesterday." I showed her the photo of the notice board. Her face paled slightly, but her jaw set in that determined way I'd come to know so well. "Someone's trying to mess with the team before the championship." Before we could discuss it further, Daphne's phone buzzed. The color drained from her face as she read the message. "Christina, look at this." It was a photo of Sarah's empty wheelchair, abandoned in what looked like a parking garage. The message below read, "Keep winning, and the next chair won't be empty." "We have to call the police," I insisted. But Daphne grabbed my arm. "Wait, Sarah's missing, but what if going to the police makes things worse? What if?" She hesitated. "What if this is about more than just our team?" That afternoon, another strange incident occurred. While checking the first aid supplies, I found a crumpled note stuffed inside one of the new supply boxes. "Some injuries can't be fixed with bandages. Back off, or you'll learn this firsthand." The threat was clear, but it only strengthened my resolve. As an EMT, I'd sworn to help people in danger. As someone who loved Daphne, I couldn't walk away from this. That evening, as we sat in my apartment trying to piece together what we knew, Daphne received another text. This one contained a video, security footage of Sarah entering the sports complex late at night, followed by 2 shadowy figures. The timestamp was from the night before she disappeared. "There's something bigger going on here," Daphne said, her voice tight with worry. "Something dangerous." I wrapped my arms around her from behind, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Whatever it is, we'll figure it out together. I'm not letting anything happen to you or your team." But as we sat there going over everything we knew, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The mysterious caller had drawn us into something dark, something that went beyond simple sports rivalry or championship pressure. As I lay in bed that night, Daphne sleeping fitfully beside me, I stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Someone was trying to intimidate us, but why? What did Sarah discover that made her a target? And most importantly, how could we protect ourselves and the team while uncovering the truth? The championship was approaching rapidly, and with it, I feared, would come answers we might not be ready to face. The pieces started falling into place when I overheard 2 men arguing in the parking lot after late practice. Hidden behind a pillar, I caught fragments of their heated conversation about betting odds and point spreads. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. That evening, I shared my suspicions with Daphne over dinner at my place. "I think there's an illegal betting ring targeting Paralympic sports," I said, pushing my barely touched pasta around my plate. It would explain Sarah's disappearance and the threats. Daphne's hands tightened on her wheels. "The championship has major visibility this year. The prize money is significant." She paused, looking troubled. Sarah had been asking questions about some of our recent games, saying the scores felt wrong. The next morning, I started digging deeper. My EMT credentials gave me access to the sports complex's medical records, and I noticed a pattern. Several teams had reported unusual injuries before key games, always when they were favored to win. While reviewing security footage, a familiar face caught my attention. One of the arguing men from the parking lot was talking to our facility manager, their body language tense and hostile. I snapped a photo with my phone, but the movement caught someone's attention. "Looking for something specific?" The voice behind me made me jump. It was Marcus, one of the new security guards. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Just reviewing protocols," I lied smoothly, but my heart was racing. That night, I found my car had been keyed, a crude warning scratched into the paint. The threats only made me more protective of Daphne. I started accompanying her everywhere, watching for suspicious faces in crowds, double-checking every entrance and exit. My EMT training had taught me to stay calm in emergencies, but this constant state of vigilance was wearing me down. One night, after a particularly intense practice session, Daphne noticed my exhaustion. "You can't keep this up," she said softly, reaching for my hand. "You're running yourself ragged trying to protect me." "I can't lose you," I admitted, the words catching in my throat. "These people are dangerous, Daphne, what they did to Sarah." She pulled me closer, her lips finding mine in a fierce kiss that left me breathless. When we broke apart, her eyes were determined. "Then we fight them together. I won't let them take this away from us." That night, cuddled together in her bed, we formulated a plan. Daphne would continue training as normal while I gathered evidence. We agreed to share everything we discovered, no matter how small or seemingly insignificant. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. While treating a minor injury for one of Daphne's teammates, Jenny, she confided in me. "Sarah found betting slips," she whispered, glancing around nervously. "She said the numbers didn't make sense. Some of the players were throwing games." Before I could press for more details, Jenny clammed up, clearly frightened. But it was enough to confirm our suspicions. The Paralympic circuit had become a target for match fixing, with millions potentially at stake. That evening I received another warning. This one slipped under my apartment door. EMTs should stick to bandaging wounds, not opening them. The implicit threat made my skin crawl. Daphne found me staring at the note, my hands shaking slightly. Without a word, she pulled me into her arms, holding me until the trembling stopped. "We're close to something," she murmured into my hair. "They wouldn't be trying so hard to scare us off if we weren't." Later that night, as we lay together in the darkness, Daphne traced patterns on my skin. "Whatever happens," she whispered, Knowing you're by my side makes me stronger." I turned to face her, memorizing every detail of her face in the dim light. "I'm not going anywhere," I promised, sealing the words with a kiss. But as we drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that our investigation was leading us towards something bigger and more dangerous than we'd imagined. The championship was just days away, and I had a terrible feeling that someone was going to make a move soon. I pulled Daphne closer, listening to her steady breathing, and silently vowed to protect her, no matter what came next. We were in this together now, for better or worse, and I wasn't about to let anyone tear us apart. The championship loomed just 48 hours away, and the tension in the sports complex was palpable. Daphne's practice sessions had intensified, each movement precise and determined. I watched from the sidelines, my EMT bag closer than usual, my eyes scanning constantly for any sign of trouble. "Your girl's looking strong," Jenny said, rolling up beside me. Since our conversation about Sarah, she'd become an ally, sharing subtle observations about suspicious activities around the complex, but they're watching her closely. She wasn't wrong. I'd noticed the increased scrutiny from certain staff members, particularly Marcus, the security guard who'd caught me reviewing footage. His presence felt more menacing with each passing day. During a water break, Daphne wheeled over, her face flushed from exertion. "The scout from the national team is coming tomorrow," she said, excitement dancing in her eyes despite her exhaustion. I handed her a water bottle, our fingers brushing. "That's amazing news," I replied, though my stomach tightened with worry. Higher stakes meant greater risk. That evening, as I helped Daphne with her post-practice stretches, she suddenly tensed under my hands. "Christina," she whispered, "I got a message from Sarah." My heart stopped. "What?" She showed me her phone. "I'm safe. Don't trust Marcus. Files in locker 217. The message was sent from an unknown number. We waited until the complex was nearly empty before investigating. Locker 217 was in the old wing, unused since the renovation. With trembling fingers, I picked the lock, thankful for the skills my rebellious teenage years had left me. Inside, we found a USB drive and a notebook filled with dates, names, and amounts. Sarah had been documenting everything, building a case against the betting ring. The USB contained screenshots of conversations, bank transfers, and lists of guaranteed game outcomes. "This is enough to blow everything wide open," Daphne breathed, scanning the documents. A noise in the hallway made us freeze. Footsteps approached, then passed. When we finally breathed again, Daphne pulled me close, her lips finding mine in a desperate kiss. The fear, the tension, the uncertainty of the past weeks poured out between us. We barely made it back to my apartment, need and adrenaline driving us. That night, we came together with an intensity that left us both breathless, clinging to each other in the darkness. It felt like a lifeline, a reminder of what we were fighting for. Later, tangled in sheets and each other, Daphne traced the worry lines on my forehead. "We should take this to the police," she said softly. "It's not that simple," I replied, thinking of the warnings, the threats. "We need to be smart about this. One wrong move." A text message interrupted us. "Back off now, or your girlfriend won't make it to the championship." Attached was a photo of us entering my apartment building, taken just hours ago. Daphne's hand found mine in the darkness, squeezing tight. "They're trying to scare us." "It's working," I admitted, pulling her closer. "I won't let them win," she said fiercely. "Not after everything we've discovered, everything Sarah risked to expose this." We spent the rest of the night planning, fueled by determination and coffee. By dawn, we had a strategy. We'd make copies of everything, send them to trusted contacts. The evidence would be too widespread to suppress. As I drove Daphne to morning practice, the sunrise painted the sky in fierce oranges and reds. "Whatever happens today," she said, "know that meeting you changed everything for me." I pulled into the parking lot, heart racing. "We're going to get through this," I promised, though fear clawed at my throat. "Together." She smiled, that brilliant, determined smile that had first captured my heart. "Together," she agreed. Watching her wheel toward the entrance, I thought about how much had changed since that first aid class. How this woman had wheeled into my life and turned everything upside down in the best possible way. The championship was tomorrow, and our evidence was ready to be revealed. But as I followed Daphne into the complex, I couldn't shake the feeling that the betting ring wouldn't go down without a fight. The next 24 hours would change everything, for better or worse. All we could do now was hold on to each other and face whatever came next with the same determination that had brought us this far. The morning of the championship qualifier dawned gray and threatening, matching the mood at the sports complex. Evidence of the betting scandal weighed heavily in my bag, but the timing had to be perfect. One wrong move could send everything crashing down. I found Daphne in the training room, her face set in concentration as she went through her pre-game routine. "The sports commission representative is here," I whispered, kneeling beside her chair, along with 3 people I've never seen before. "Probably here to make sure their bets pay off," she replied grimly. "Did you notice Marcus watching the entrance like a hawk?" I nodded, my hand finding hers briefly. The security guard's presence had become increasingly menacing over the past 24 hours. Every time I looked up, I found his eyes following either me or Daphne. The evidence we'd gathered painted a clear picture. The betting ring had infiltrated multiple levels of Paralympic sports, manipulating outcomes through threats and bribes. Sarah's disappearance was just the tip of the iceberg. As team captain, Daphne had been under immense pressure to throw the championship game. The threats had escalated from suggestive to explicit, but she'd stood firm. "I won't betray everything I've worked for," she'd told me last night. "Everything we've discovered." Now, watching her prepare for the game, I saw the toll it was taking. Her shoulders were tense, her movements slightly less fluid than usual. The weight of our knowledge pressed down on both of us. "I've been thinking," she said suddenly, pausing in her stretches. "Maybe I should withdraw. The risk." "No," I interrupted, more forcefully than I intended. "That's exactly what they want, to break your spirit, to make you doubt yourself." I moved closer, lowering my voice. "You're stronger than they are." She looked up at me, vulnerability and determination warring in her green eyes. Then she pulled me down for a kiss that left no doubt about her decision. "You make me brave," she whispered against my lips. The moment was interrupted by Jenny rolling in, her face pale. "They're asking questions about Sarah," she said quietly. "Marcus is telling people she embezzled team funds and ran." My blood boiled. They were trying to discredit Sarah before we could reveal the truth. "Not for long," I promised, patting the bag containing our evidence. As game time approached, the tension in the arena became unbearable. I watched from my designated medical station as Daphne led her team onto the court, her head held high despite the whispers and pointed looks. Just before tip-off, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "Last chance to walk away. Some accidents can't be prevented, even with the best medical care." I showed it to Daphne during the final team huddle. Her jaw set in that familiar determined line. "We're done being afraid," she declared, loud enough for her teammates to hear. "We're playing this game our way." The first quarter was intense, with Daphne's team matching their opponents point for point. I could see the frustration on Marcus's face as he spoke urgently into his phone. The game wasn't following their script. During a timeout, Daphne wheeled over for a water bottle. "Whatever happens," she said softly, "I love you. You know that, right?" My heart swelled. "I love you too," I replied, the words feeling both terrifying and absolutely right. "Now go show them what you're made of." As she returned to the court, I noticed Marcus moving toward the locker room area. Something in his stance set off alarm bells. I touched the USB drive in my pocket, containing copies of all our evidence, and made a decision. It was time to stop playing defense and take the fight to them. We had truth on our side, and more importantly, we had each other. Whatever came next, we would face it together. I signaled to Jenny, who nodded imperceptibly. Our counteroffensive was about to begin, and the betting ring wouldn't know what hit them until it was too late. The game clock ticked down, each second bringing us closer to the moment of truth. I watched Daphne on the court, her movements precise and powerful, and knew we'd made the right choice. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The anonymous email arrived during halftime, sent to every member of the sports commission and local press. "Check the maintenance office computer. Password, Fix Games 2023. The source was untraceable, but I recognized Sarah's methodical style. Jenny had been busy during those tense days after Sarah's disappearance, working with her to gather digital evidence. While Marcus and his crew focused on threatening us, they'd missed the quiet information gathering happening right under their noses. The reaction was immediate. Officials descended on the maintenance office, while security scrambled to respond. I watched Marcus's face turn ashen as he realized what was happening. He made a move toward the exit but found his path blocked by two stern-looking commission representatives. "Christina," Daphne called from the court, her eyes wide with understanding. "The files?" I nodded, relief flooding through me. The USB drive in my pocket was just our backup plan. The real evidence had been quietly uploaded to multiple secure servers hours ago. The game was temporarily suspended as chaos erupted in the administrative offices. Through the commotion, a familiar figure appeared at the side entrance. Sarah, looking tired but determined, wheeled in flanked by two police officers. "Sorry for the dramatic entrance," she said, rolling up to where Daphne and I stood. "Had to make sure everything was properly documented before coming forward." Daphne grabbed her hand, tears in her eyes. "We thought—" "I know," Sarah squeezed back. "But I couldn't risk them destroying the evidence. Been working with the Gaming Commission's fraud unit since I first noticed the pattern." The truth came out in a rush. Sarah had discovered the betting scheme months ago and had been quietly building a case. Her disappearance was actually a planned operation with the Gaming Commission to gather final proof of the corruption. "The threats against you two helped seal the case," Sarah explained. "They got sloppy when they got desperate." I watched as Marcus and several other facility staff were led away in handcuffs. The betting ring's reach had extended further than anyone suspected, involving administrators, referees, and even medical staff. The commission chairman called an emergency meeting with all team captains. Daphne squeezed my hand before joining them, her head held high. "We'll finish this game fair and square," she declared. When play resumed, the atmosphere in the arena had transformed. Gone was the undercurrent of tension and fear, replaced by pure athletic competition. I watched from my station as Daphne led her team with renewed energy, every movement a celebration of honest sport. Sarah sat with me, filling in the gaps of her investigation. "I knew I could trust you two," she said quietly. "Saw how you looked at each other. Knew you'd fight for what's right." The game finished under intense security, with Gaming Commission officials monitoring every play. Daphne's team played their hearts out, neither afraid nor constrained by illegal schemes. As the final buzzer sounded, I found myself surrounded by celebrating players and officials. The scandal had been exposed, the corruption rooted out, and the championship would proceed under new oversight. Daphne wheeled through the crowd toward me, her face glowing with triumph and relief. When she reached me, she pulled me down for a kiss that drew cheers from her teammates. "I love you," she whispered against my lips. "Thank you for believing in me, in us." Later that evening, as the dust settled and statements were taken, we sat together in the quiet of the empty arena. Sarah had gone with the commission to provide final documentation, but not before hugging us both fiercely. "What happens now?" I asked, watching Daphne trace patterns on my palm. She smiled, that brilliant, determined smile that had first captured my heart. "Now we play basketball," she said simply. "The way it's meant to be played." The championship would proceed as scheduled, but with new officials and stringent oversight. More importantly, we'd shown that integrity and love could triumph over corruption and fear. As we left the arena that night, hand in hand, I realized that sometimes the biggest victories happen off the court. In fighting for truth, we'd found something even more precious, an unshakable trust in each other and the strength to face whatever challenges came our way. The championship final arrived with perfect weather and unprecedented security. After the betting scandal, the Gaming Commission had taken no chances. Every referee had been vetted, every official screened. The atmosphere crackled with anticipation, and for the first time in months, pure athletic spirit. I watched from my medical station as Daphne led her team through warm-ups, her movements fluid and confident. The past week's events had transformed her. Gone was the shadow of fear that had haunted her eyes, replaced by fierce determination. "Your girl's going to make history today," Sarah commented, wheeling up beside me. She'd recovered well from her ordeal and had been reinstated as team coordinator, first team captain to challenge corruption and win before even playing the championship. The opposing team was strong, their reputation untarnished by the scandal. The game started fast, with both sides trading baskets. Daphne's leadership showed in every play, every strategic timeout. Her team moved like a single organism, their chairs extensions of their bodies. By halftime, we were up by 6 points. When Daphne came over for water, her face was flushed with exertion and joy. "Having fun?" I asked, handing her a fresh towel. More than I've had in months, she grinned, pulling me down for a quick kiss that drew cheers from the crowd. We'd become something of a symbol since the scandal broke, the EMT and the athlete who helped expose corruption in Paralympic sports. The second half was intense. Our opponents rallied, closing the gap point by point. With 2 minutes left, we were tied. During a timeout, I caught Daphne's eye across the court. She winked, and I knew she had something planned. What followed was the most beautiful display of wheelchair basketball I'd ever witnessed. Daphne orchestrated a series of plays that had the crowd on their feet. Her final assist, a behind-the-back pass that led to the winning basket, would be talked about for years to come. The buzzer sounded, and the arena erupted. We'd won, not just the game, but something larger. We'd won back the integrity of the sport. In the chaos of celebration, Daphne wheeled straight to me, tears streaming down her face. Without warning, she pulled me into her lap, kissing me deeply as cameras flashed around us. The moment would make headlines, but neither of us cared. The victory celebration moved to my apartment later that night. Sarah and Jenny joined us, along with several teammates. As stories and laughter filled the room, I watched Daphne holding court from her chair, her championship medal glinting in the soft light. "Come here," she called, patting her lap. When I settled there, she wrapped her arms around my waist. "Thank you," she whispered against my neck, "for everything." The party wound down slowly, our friends leaving with hugs and knowing smiles. When we were finally alone, Daphne pulled me close again. "Stay with me tonight?" "Tonight and every night," I replied, leaning down to kiss her. Later, tangled in sheets and each other, we talked about the future. About moving in together, about my new role as team medic, about all the possibilities stretching out before us. "You know," Daphne mused, tracing patterns on my skin. "When I first volunteered for that first aid class, I never imagined it would lead to this." I laughed softly. "You mean exposing a betting scandal, winning a championship, and falling in love?" "Exactly." She pulled me closer. "Best decision I ever made." As we drifted off to sleep, the championship trophy catching moonlight on the dresser, I realized that sometimes the biggest victories come disguised as simple choices, like volunteering for a first aid class, or choosing to fight for what's right. But mostly, they come from choosing love, again and again, even when the odds seem stacked against you, especially then. The night wrapped around us like a blanket, and I fell asleep to the sound of Daphne's steady breathing, knowing that whatever challenges tomorrow brought, we'd face them together. Champions, in every sense of the word. 3 months after the championship, I found myself standing in front of a mirror, adjusting my new Paralympic Sports Medicine Division badge. The Gaming Commission had created an entire department dedicated to athlete welfare and fair play, and they'd offered me the position of lead medical coordinator. "Stop fiddling with it," Daphne said, wheeling into our bedroom. Our bedroom, the words still gave me butterflies. We'd moved in together 2 weeks after the championship, converting my apartment into a fully accessible space. "You look perfect." The past months had been a whirlwind of change. The exposure of the betting scandal had led to a complete overhaul of Paralympic sports administration. Sarah had been appointed to the oversight committee, and Jenny was now heading athlete advocacy. "Ready for your first day?" Daphne asked, pulling me down for a quick kiss. She'd just returned from morning practice, her face still flushed from exertion. As national team captain, she was busier than ever, but somehow we'd found our rhythm. "Almost," I replied, stealing another kiss. "Just need to grab my new medical bag." The community center had changed too. The first aid classes I'd once taught had evolved into a comprehensive sports medicine program. Twice a week, I worked with aspiring Paralympic athletes, teaching them about body awareness and injury prevention. "Don't forget we're meeting Sarah and Jenny for dinner," Daphne called as I gathered my things. They want to discuss the new mentorship program. The program had been Daphne's idea, pairing experienced athletes with newcomers to the sport. It was her way of ensuring that future athletes would have the support system we'd found in each other. As I drove to the sports complex, I passed the coffee shop where we'd had our first real conversation. So much had changed since then, yet some things remained beautifully constant, like the way my heart still skipped when Daphne smiled at me. My new office overlooked the training courts. Through the window, I could see athletes arriving for morning practice, their movements confident and unrestricted by fear or corruption. We'd helped create that freedom, that safety. A knock at my door revealed Sarah, grinning widely. "Ready for the surprise?" "What surprise?" She led me to the main hall, where a crowd had gathered. Daphne was at the center, her championship medal glinting under the lights. As I approached, confused, she wheeled forward. "Christina Williams," she announced, her voice carrying across the suddenly quiet space. "You walked into my life during a first aid class and proceeded to save not just me, but our entire sport." She reached for my hand. "Now, I'm hoping you'll let me save a piece of your future." My heart stopped as she pulled out a small box. Inside was a key attached to a silver metal ribbon. "Move to Colorado with me," she said softly. "They're opening a new Paralympic training center, and they need a medical director. Someone who understands both the physical and emotional aspects of adaptive sports." Tears blurred my vision as I realized what she was offering. Not just a new job, but a new chapter for both of us. A chance to expand our impact, to help more athletes find their strength. "On one condition," I managed, my voice thick with emotion. "You have to marry me first." The hall erupted in cheers as Daphne pulled me down into her chair, kissing me thoroughly. "Deal," she whispered against my lips. Later that night, curled together in our bed, we talked about the future, about Colorado, about marriage, about all the ways we could help change Paralympic sports for the better. "You know what's funny?" Daphne mused, playing with my fingers. "Everyone thinks I'm the champion because of the medal, but you're the real hero of this story." I shook my head, pulling her closer. "We're both champions," I corrected. "We won something bigger than any game." As we drifted off to sleep, I thought about that first day in the community center, about all the twists and turns that had led us here. Sometimes the greatest victories come not from winning games, but from finding the courage to love fully, fight fiercely, and stand up for what's right. And sometimes, just sometimes, you get to build a whole new future with the person who taught you how to be brave.